I got lots
Okay.
of questions, so I might start with that so that we can cover as many as possible during the next half hour. First one that I'm going to address, and I'm going to do this in order of the most voted up, comes from Manuel Morantes and reads, how can unresolved ambiguous loss affect children and family systems across generations? Um, Sarah, would you like to start with that? And Farhan, feel free to, come in, after if you'd like to add anything.
Thank you for that question. And Farhan, thank you. I felt very connected to the story that you were telling. And I, this sounds a little bit like I'm putting my ego first, but I didn't mean it like that. But that what you said reflected the evidence base of the limited things that we do know about ambiguous loss and working in this space. So thank you for that, because it can sometimes feel quite isolating. There is really limited exploration in the evidence base around the ways in which we can better respond to the generational exposures to ambiguous loss. We know that, I've worked with so many families where even if the person is 2 or 3 generations removed where they remain missing, irrespective of the circumstance, that the space of that person is still very much present within families, and that intergenerational trauma, but also the intergenerational love and connection continues to extend. So those stories don't just become the final explorations of loss of who has been lost, but who has still not been found. I think that, there wasn't space in the presentation for me today to talk about the really important connection to ritual and spirituality and religiosity for families experiencing an ambiguous loss, because we take away the opportunity for them to share with the community that a loss has occurred and to respectfully and I guess, beautifully reflect on the ways in which they care for the remains of the person when they come back. So I think that that opened wound exists for long periods of time. I saw that one of the comments talked about stolen generation and working with Aboriginal communities. We know that trauma transcends generations. But I think the part that's missing here is that we don't talk about the ambiguity of losses. We just talk about the finality of losses passing down.
Thank you, Sarah. And you began to address the next question, which is how do cultural beliefs and rituals shape experiences of ambiguous loss? And I wonder,
Yeah.
Farhan, whether you want to add your perspective on this. You are muted. Uh, but the next question reads, how do cultural beliefs and rituals shape experiences of ambiguous loss? And also feel free to comment on the previous one, which is, how these ambiguous laws affect children and family systems across
Yep.
generation.
Um, in in my work with this client and just across the whole community, I think the impact on children is not recognized as much as the impact on the adults. And I can speak from the perspective of my community at least. Children and yeah, kids and teenagers are often perceived as they do not understand what is going on, but it is deeply impactful on them as well, and definitely uh, it's shaped a lot of survivor guilt and how they feel about themselves. That could have been me, like that statement. On the other one, on the next question, I think cultural belief, including religion belief, can shape the whole experience, and how recognized this type of loss is in the culture. It's not something new for Yazidis. They have always dealt with that. That's why we have
as I mentioned, a whole genre of music and stories on that. And but I think people are still uh, referring to it as a loss that is like sometimes easier than the death, because uh, they might show up, they might come home, and but the process of how that looks like is really double the impact of the death, and that how that looked like for my client, at least. She was not kind of allowed to mourn this loss, because it's not a defined loss. And she told me that her brothers would go to her and tell her she needs to stop, like waiting for her children, because they never coming up. If they were to come up, they would have showed up and so there is a lot of community slash cultural and a lot of religion, and that mash of like beliefs comes definitely to these losses.
I think, Farhan, I'm really connecting with what you're talking about as well, because I feel like I've been working in this space for so long that I've seen also the role of social media and the 24-hour news cycle on the ways in which we give language to loss. Because I think now, particularly with content that is created by people with lived experience, it gives language in a way that we might not have seen before and connects people's experiences. But I think it's a really difficult space that if families are sitting in the possibility of somebody not coming back, the stories that are shared online of someone inexplicably coming back or being located or a similar story, it means that it suddenly brings it into people's living rooms or onto their phone where they're able to see all of the possibilities. I think some work that came out of the Netherlands talked about that it's not post-traumatic stress disorder necessarily that families of missing are experiencing, but it's imagined trauma as well. So they have the circumstances of how the person disappeared, as well as the potential hundreds of scenarios that their mind and the media plays to them, and that's the traumatic space that also needs to be named. So I think media can be helpful in giving name to experiences, but it can also offer a multitude of ideas that someone had never even thought of.
Thank you both. We might move on to the next question, which comes from Sarah Bailey and reads, how do you balance as a practitioner when you're part of the community also experiencing ambiguous laws? And Farhan, maybe you can address that.
This is my my daily work, basically. And as I said, when your story is very close to them, and there is barriers with maintaining these boundaries, especially in our context. We live in a very small town where we are really visible to everyone else, and being part of the community is just another extra layer of that complexity. And I take that to supervision and work through it myself, and maintain clear boundaries. One thing that I like about my community is they appreciate clarity and they appreciate honesty. So I am really honest with them. I said, oh, look, this is where my limits are, and it is a struggle as well. Like we're not denying that in any way, and it has its impact. I would say, definitely more than other context of therapy.
I think just Jorge, just thinking before we moved on, the other part that I think is really important, a lot of my PhD students lived experience and then undertaking lived experience research. And for me, I came to my research and then my lived experience happened. So I think it's always important to recognize that the pipeline isn't always have the lived experience and then engage with that community, but that sometimes when you engage with communities, life happens and then the lived experience can inexplicably happen to you. And I think that it's probably something that we don't always talk about, but the likelihood of trauma happening in our lives is high for everybody. And so I think exactly like Farhan talked about, really making sure that we're connected in with our clinical supervisors, that we're understanding our boundaries, but that we're always renegotiating them as we grow and different life transitions happen, that it's not always one direction. You can kind of go backwards as well as going forwards at the same time.
Thank you, Sarah. Kind of throwing a couple of connected questions. The first one comes from Sandra Nordenstahl, and it reads: Is hope for justice a part of being able to build a life in the new place? And there's a related question from Sarah Bailey, which reads: Related to Sandra's wondering about the impact of justice. I'm thinking about the court proceedings related to the IS wives returning from Syria. And how does that impact that process of, ambiguous loss and grief? It's quite a complex question, but it's one that I would
Of course, I
love
think I
some comment.
mentioned that very briefly in my talk. The the recovery environment is also not perfect, and it comes with all its challenges, and that sense of safety can be challenged because refugees live refugee experiences that are that has its challenges, but they also living in a context where normal life challenges can also not can also definitely are there for them, and especially in the Yazidi context, the topic of ISIS linked people, and also the recent event that happened in Bondi. So all these events can reactivate that and trigger that sense of loss and trauma, and reactivate the story that they lived, and create a whole lot of anxiety around where to from now, and people, I think, have already started making up scenarios. What if I encounter this person? What if I, these are all like real concerns, and the impact is so real. I think.
Thank you. Sarah?
I think justice is a really interesting question. It's kind of an interesting word. You can almost interrogate it like the concept of hope, can't you? Because it has multiple meanings. We often view it through a recovery lens, I think, in our work, yet it can be institutional trauma in itself when justice isn't allowed. I think the ways that I've seen it turn up in the narratives of others in both counselling and research is the unfairness of some groups being afforded opportunities for justice over others. I think even quite recently, looking at the fact that there have been a number of inquiries, state-based and Commonwealth-based in Australia, that seek the insights of people with lived experience of particular types of trauma. And then we see that the findings of those inquiries or the recommendations are not handed down. And I think people place a lot of emphasis on, if I share my perspective, if I speak loud enough, that someone will listen and someone will do something about it. And I think the reality of ambiguous loss is sometimes that hard truth of learning that nobody might be coming to rescue people, or nobody is coming to set things right. And I think that we have to really caution, even from a research perspective. I'm always incredibly focused on making sure that I'm doing research that is going to value add the community, not just confirm what we already know. And not keep asking people to share their stories, to tell us about things that have happened to them if we don't have the power to create change. So I think justice and legal aspects and criminal aspects and international crime, all of those sorts of things, I think that they sometimes add to the hopefulness that people have, but they can very much take away their hope as well. So it sits in that liminal space.
Thank you both. Let's move to a slightly different aspect of these. And the question, comes from Tivans Wong and is addressed to Farhan. And it reads, if you could share how you gently build coping skills and capacity to tolerate distress, what has worked well and not so well for you?
Yeah. So for me or for the client, the
I think we can interpret maybe both ways,
Yep.
Farhan.
Okay. So I shared on my slide what was not working for a client in my perspective and the outcomes. Sometimes we're not seen at all. I think if I could put that really shortly, that would be stabilize and slow work. Often we therapists can push for progress, or like we have lists of client and wait list, and like we have the next one waiting for us. Like we can get into that mentality of like working for an hour and to get it done. I think slowing down the work and being really present with the client can really be impactful. And when it comes to this oscillation mode, I think flexibility is key. Being flexible to what client brings in rather than what you have planned for the sessions. And I quickly learned in my work at Stars that my plans are barely, like go ahead, and we have to sit something that is entirely different for the sessions. We have plans for like the overall goal of therapy, but what is coming to the session, you never know, especially given to this whole variety of factors that impact their presentation.
Thank you. Any comments, Sarah?
I think that some of the questions that people have asked, but also exactly what Farhan talked about, is that we often look when people are exposed to ambiguous loss, there's all of this movement within the session or the space of when you talk to somebody. It could be you start off at a particular point at the beginning, 5 minutes later, there can be a different focus. From week to week, it's going to change. So there's no certainty as to how to move with it. I think that acknowledging the distress as a result of the uncertainty is the important point, but also talking to people about what allows them to live alongside. Some work that I did years ago with the Australian Federal Police was writing a counselling framework that's still available on their website, I think. It's called Acknowledging the Empty Space. And it's about like really being present with the person about what is it that you're missing. I think it's really like it sounds a bit reductive to ask that, but to understand all of the spaces that people exist and the relationships and the future that's missing, but also the past that's gone as well, and the trauma that they've experienced. I think we really need to understand the multifactorial presentations of an ambiguous loss. And it's the psychological distress of not knowing when this will be over that people need sometimes some compassion-based mindfulness in order to learn some strategies to slow their breathing and to sit with it. Because for some people, you will continue to see them for a long period of time and there will be no movement in the case. But the only movement that can happen is them giving themselves some compassion that they're living with something that is not a normal type of grief, for want of a better word.
Thank you. The next question comes from Bina O'Sullivan and reads, lovely presence and presentation. Farhan, would you please clarify how the client's somatic symptoms will manage anybody-focused therapies to help pain and fatigue, as well as to help stabilize body-mind?
Yeah, so there was a lot of coordination with the GP and the physiotherapist. I mentioned the regional setting and challenges with the trauma-informed services and just the variety of services we have. It's really limited, and there were of course referrals to physiotherapists and constant connection with the GP on how to manage their somatic presentation.
Thank you. Might throw in a question myself. When I started working with STADS, about more than 30 years ago, some of the main group of clients was coming from Latin America, where disappearances were very, very common, and one of the tools that were used in addition to culture, incarceration, and killings, and so we work with a lot of clients who were in this ambiguous space that you both talked about. And one of the things that we, that I often saw in those clients, was a sense of guilt about any improvements made in their lives or in treatment, in the sense of, they seem to be caught between these somehow letting go of the hope and exactly that space that they both describe, and in particular Sarah, but also associated with a lot of guilt about any improvements in medium therapy or in their life in general. Is that something that you've seen, and could you comment on this?
Sorry, I was just shuffling about, not because I wasn't listening, because I was trying to grab something. One of the things that I didn't have an opportunity to reflect on is I do a lot of work with an Australian charity called the MIST Foundation that was set up from a lived experience perspective. But one of the projects we've been working on, both here in Australia and internationally, is something called the Hope Narratives. And we worked with families in Mexico, so families of the disappeared. We've also worked in a number of other countries where there have been mass missing persons events. And I think that part of that was we ran it as a 2-day event and then explored the narratives across the world with 50 families. Is we created some therapeutic cards that explored ideas of living with the hard truths of having somebody missing, about understanding what coping meant to them, and also giving space to be able to name the ways in which that person individually or that family could hold on to hope and what it meant to oscillate between letting go of hope and holding on to it at the same time. And I think the power of what we've been able to see to have this translated into community languages is that it wasn't just the opportunity for a therapist to be able to sit and work through the cards with a person, but whole family groups to be able to plot out what it meant for them when some felt very stagnant or stuck in spaces. Some felt very frozen to the time that somebody went missing. And then others felt like they were able to live with the realities of what had happened and focused on what they could do to live fully. So I'll pop the information. I can see that Kim's asking about it, but I think it was a really beautiful community embedded opportunity to say hope means something different to every person. and that it is not about achieving the end of the therapeutic intervention, but about recognizing that this is a lifelong practice of flowing in between hopefulness and hopelessness.
Thank you. Farhan, any comments on this? Is this something that you also seen with the CD clients that you work with?
Yeah, it's definitely a community-wide thing. Yeah, and I definitely agree with Sarah on that.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next question. This comes from April Darling, and it's addressed to you, Farhan. And reads, "Thank you for the presentation. It was very moving. Could you please tell us a bit more about how you helped Heavy in the early stages to develop trust and safety in social relationships with her family members?"
Yep. In my context would be a little different, I think, because uh, as I said, I met the whole family, and Heavy was my client in the family, and there was a lot of uh, I guess working with the client to also then scaffold the support for the whole family as well with that, and how I managed like to build trust. It took us some time, and there were some challenges to that. Being a male counselor was one of these challenges, and also there was an age gap in between, like our ages, and I think pace for her to share emotions and to just be interested in what they have to say and be curious in that. A lot of clients, including Heavy, um, they have never had someone asking them how their day was or how their week was. So this by itself, that presence by itself, was a trustworthy, uh, I guess, intervention or techniques. So just listening and being present for a lot of client, it works, and yeah, and also giving that practical, so giving that that idea that I we are working for whatever you are working towards. I'm not pushing you into anything. I'm just meeting you where you at, rather than bringing you where I am with my knowledge or intervention or technique.
Thank you, Farhan. Probably have time for one or two more questions. Next one comes from Shakemo Martin, and it reads, "Thank you both. You spoke about the importance of being present as clinicians and containment when working with ongoing unresolved loss. How do clinicians hold and manage their own feelings of helplessness, particularly when there is no resolution or clear pathway to closure for the client?"
I think the answer is it's always a work in practice. I don't think I've achieved it. I think it's a continual focus of almost physically sitting on my hands or almost sometimes wanting to turn my brain off or shut my mouth. I think in the face of people sharing with us their hope and their heartache, of course, as human beings, we want to step in and try and kind of I was explaining to someone that I mother and I work as a social worker, almost like I'm running ahead of everybody, clearing a pathway to make it easier for them. Um, and I know that that's not my job. And so I'm constantly working on how can I, exactly as Farhan said, be where somebody is, not where I'd love them to be. I would love to be able to magic away the pain. I think a lot of it is, and actually, I will say one of the reasons why I stepped away from doing very intensive trauma group work and counselling to my PhD was because I was finding that the stories were sticking to me more than they used to at the beginning of my career. I still wanted to do the work, but I didn't want to be the work all of the time. And switching to the research space still allows me my connection to families through research. But I don't have to, and this sounds privileged, but it's the truth. Sometimes you get really exhausted from sitting in the rubble with people all of the time. So I felt like I could still do something, but that still involves clinical supervision, critical reflection, working out what's my stuff, what's their stuff, and working out what I'm bringing to the space that needs to be left at the door, but making sure my compassion and my empathy comes in the door with me all of the time, as well as the skills. So it's a work in progress, and I don't feel like I'll ever get there. But being aware of it is really important.
Farhan, do you
Can I
comment on
just
this
add,
one?
yeah, I think what Sarah said really resonates with me as well, and I think one thing that I learned through supervision is that transference and counter-transference, the relationship that is the intervention. And if we don't have that, the whole process is not happening. If like if you don't feel it in your body afterwards, and you don't work on to reduce that, I don't think you were present.
Yeah.
Just being really natural and organic, I guess. That we are human and we come with our stories and experiences. I mentioned my own journey with loss, with resettlement, like we can't help but be impacted.
Got many, many, many more questions, but we only a bit over a minute. I'm going to throw one that really relates to this one, which is if you can just, we only have a few seconds to answer it, but how do you negotiate finishing therapy in this liminal space where there is no resolution?
Sometimes I think it's important to acknowledge that the systems that we work in aren't always designed to respond to ambiguity, because some services will simply say you can only work for 8 to 10 sessions or 22 hours or whatever equation has been used. For other places, and where I originally worked, which is the Family and Friends of Missing Persons unit, we had open-ended referrals. And I sometimes think that wasn't always helpful either, because I think it was important to acknowledge what was happening right now, and then prompting people to go and live their lives alongside their loss with the awareness that they could come back was really important, but not necessarily the continual connection. And, I think I made a lot of mistakes in those very, very early days. And 25 years later, I still hear from some of those families, but that's an honor for me, but perhaps not the greatest boundaries at the time. But I think finishing up is not saying the story's over, just that you have capacity, you have agency, you have the knowledge in order to wake up each day and live alongside your loss.
Thank you. Any comments on this, Farhan?
I just thumbs up for all that. Just say, how about we pause for some time and process what we learned in kind of this space. And if you feel that you need to come back, please do. And yeah, I think we are lucky at STARS that we can always have them referred back.
Agree.
Yeah.
I think it's really trauma informed that people know that someone has retained their story and they can come back to where their story was told. I think we fail that in so many systems in healthcare.
Thank you both so much for
Thank you,
your
Farhan.
insightful, generous, and the wealth of knowledge, and experience and lived experience that you shared with us. I think we're privileged, to have you both helping us unpack this very complex, and incredibly challenged area of our work that's so present. I think is something that we've seen with just about every group that we've seen at STARS, and we work with so many, different communities that have been affected by repression, by trauma, by torture, by disappearances. And unfortunately, it looks very much like this is something that we'll continue to work on. So thank you so much. There's also been, some questions, Sarah, about the name of your book. So I wonder whether you could put that in there.
It's the QR code. The QR code that's coming up with the slides takes a link. It's actually going live next week, which is very exciting. And it's called Living in the Liminal Space. It's about how to teach and support people in ambiguity.
Great. And you have your context also in that. So many people have asked.
Find me on LinkedIn, find me wherever. It's all good.
Fantastic. Let me finish then, but thank you. Thank the audience. We've had, close to 300 people attending today. Lots of really interesting questions that we couldn't get to. And we will have at least 2 more masterclasses during the year, and a whole lot of other really interesting events. So please don't forget to check our website, and I hope to see you all again at next masterclass and other events. Thank you again so much, Sarah and Farhan.
Thank you, Farhan.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.